It may sound unbelievable, but I spend upwards of months on my scripts, making sure I do not repeat myself. I remove redundancy as much as I can. It's no ramble, and the editing process takes months along with it. No offense meant, but your work is precisely what I would label the opposing issue, barely covering the subject with any depth or insight whatsoever because you explore it with what is essentially a thumbs up or down per topic, and videos like this are why I started my channel. There needs to be more depth with media exploration on YouTube. Very few content creators offer it, and I was happy to fill that space in the market. From what I've heard, many people love long-form stuff, as long as you have something new to say throughout, which I do my very best to make sure is the case.
It turns out Rampart isn't with the Empire, and he's here to steal an Empire ship for a job he's apparently got to do because he's an outlaw or whatever. So he reports Ranger Solo as a mutineer, and T'Chaka, that we met in Civil War, confronts one of the two men about this plan, and it is said that he must return to Wakanda for judgment by Gay, and moments after, Rey is attacked by the men that the land whale sent after so asks, where is Han? And they fucking cut to the next scene. They cut to the next fucking scene. What the fuck?
Long criticism is not deep criticism. Now, before we get going, let's quickly go over what's not being said by that statement. That lengthy media criticism is bad or shallow criticism. That's not the argument being made here, because that's not what I think. That's not what I believe. There are many essayists who produce work which, given the respective size of the content they're covering, is fairly long. Noah Caldwell-Gervais is a video essayist who produces lengthy videos, often in excess of 2 hours long, videos which explore not only his initial reactions to a text, but elaborate on their wider context, on what may have influenced the work, or how the work may have influenced others. Offering greater depth in understanding aspects like imagery, theming, or style in a work, and why they may strike us a certain way. In his newest video, for instance, he might explain how Fallout 76's artificiality may break immersion in one respect, but on a tactile level make it easier to stay focused on the gameplay. He might explain how mechanics and elements borrowed from the Elder Scrolls make the game an arguably more enjoyable play experience, but impact on the unique energy of a Fallout game, and thus damage it in other ways. Racervic does much the same, providing a meticulous analysis of games like Mass Effect and Max Payne with videos up to an hour long. From independent creators like Lindsay Ellis and Dan Olsen to larger, more mainstream professional outlets such as NoClip, there are also creators who produce longer work which offers insight into the behind-the-scenes process of a work, information they uncover which might not have been gleaned elsewhere. Olsen runs through the whole ordeal of handling E.L. James, writer of 50 Shades, in the process of making its film adaptation, and how that reflects on the finished product. This too deepens our understanding of a text, and how we might think or feel a certain way about it. So, when I say that length does not create depth, I'm not saying length eliminates depth. It's depth neutral, simply a result of one's ability to focus their efforts, cleanly summarize relevant thoughts and information, and some tertiary stuff like just how quickly you speak, your vocabulary, and how many pauses you leave in. For instance, this opening is probably about twice as long as it needed to be to get my point across, because a lot of the time I'm basically repeating myself or making the same essential point with different wording. It did not make my video any deeper to make it this long. To which you might say, well, nobody's arguing that. You may have even paused your livestream to try and make that point. To which I respond, I'm sad to report that after combing through the work of one of YouTube's most verbose popular media critics, having spoken to him and his fans about why he feels it necessary to create works double, triple, quadruple the length of any other creator, a practice that would for anyone else lead to repetitive, aimless content which obfuscates one's own points, the idea that his video's length inherently gives it depth is the only conclusion I can possibly draw. Because boy oh boy, it sure ain't the content.
He fucking farms rhinos. Why in the goddamn hell is he farming rhinos? So I have to ask, what's with the crappy transport lighting? There's no need to sacrifice reality for something like that. She is requesting death by decapitation with an axe. Why do stormtroopers have laser versions of medieval weaponry available? Why? What does this add for the audience? Why is the Admiral wearing a ball gown? It seems so inefficient and disrespectful.
MauLer is a trending critic in the YouTube sphere, notable primarily for the fact that his videos analysing various pieces of popular media often balloon up to 4, 5, capping off at 9 hours long. As I said earlier, orders of magnitude longer than almost any other online media critic. To this, he has received an outburst of support and awe from his growing fanbase, admiring his dedication to his craft, the fact that he's willing to go further than most in his discussions of media. To stress this, praise for MauLer usually centers around his exhaustive commentary, and he has inspired many of his fans to use this same format in their own video essays. His most popular video series, a 5-hour-long critique of Star Wars The Last Jedi, has between 800,000 and 1 million views depending on the section. Now, for the purposes of open and honest critique, we'll be running through a broad selection of his noted work, which puts us at an impasse rather convenient for the man himself, who has repeatedly made it clear that critiques which do not specifically go through every single aspect of a work is an act of dishonesty. Or, well, until recently. We will not be showing all 5 hours of his Star Wars review here, just as we will not be showing all 9 hours of his Dark Souls 2 critique, nor the entirety of his many hour-plus long one-off criticisms. We will be, as with most critics, addressing the segments relevant to this discussion while trying to remain clear and straightforward about the piece as a whole. But if you're of MauLer's unique disposition that this is impossible without exhaustively summarizing the entirety of what you are critiquing, we encourage you to head over to his channel and watch the over 24 hours of content we'll be running through today. But who is this we? Well, I brought along a pal for this one. I'm gonna grab a drink and let Eric Taxxon take it from here and discuss The Last Jedi and MauLer's problem.
Doesn't show most of my video and bases his argument off of something that's just not even there.
And just to clarify for viewers, how would you discern the difference between Ripley and Rey in terms of force diversity?
One has the force.
I mean,
Hi, I'm Eric Taxxon. You might know me from a little video that I put out back in October called What is Force Diversity? A Response to the Dishonored Wolf. Now, since I released that video, I've gotten a lot of responses to it, and basically I can conclude that it's perfect, it's bulletproof, because no one can actually figure out how to respond to it, and they just end up making Wolf's arguments again, but slower and worse. Now, in that video, I say that I don't give a shit about Star Wars, because at that point I had only seen episodes 4 and 5, and it was too far back to remember. This was on purpose. I delayed watching any Star Wars media consciously, because I wanted to make it clear that it doesn't really matter whether Wolf is correct about the things he's criticizing, because he's wrong no matter what. The premise of his argument is completely baseless. And he never defines forced diversity as anything more narrow than diversity present in things he doesn't like. Apologies to everyone who wanted me to respond to the entire video point by point. You have to make arguments for me to do that. But hey, now that I've made my arguments, I can watch every single Star Wars movie, which I did. I watched every mainline Star Wars film, episodes 1 through 8. And I actually like them a lot. I'm sorry I dissed them in the video. They're actually pretty good. So the best one was The Last Jedi, obviously. But the second best was episode 3, Revenge of the Sith. I like that one a lot. And then the entire original trilogy comes next. Like, I had very similar positive feelings for all 3 of them. But Return of the Jedi was my favorite. It's closely followed by A New Hope and then Empire Strikes Back. Didn't like The Force Awakens all that much. That one comes last. And then the remaining 2 prequels are below that. Like, it had good ideas, but just critical pacing issues just made them a slog to get through. So I can speak as someone who only recently became acquainted with these works that the Star Wars films are actually good. They are #Eric Taxxon approves. However, there was another motive to me finally watching these films. See, our old pal MauLer has a 5-hour-long critique of The Last Jedi on his channel. And I wanted to give him a fair shake. So I watched the whole thing. So there you go, MauLer. Someone actually watched one of your critiques all the way through. But you thought it would never happen. So you know how sometimes people who analyze media will give you a little rundown of the plot of the film they're talking about before they start really delving into the minutia of the larger picture. Like, Dan Olson on Folding Ideas has a wonderful video called The Art of Storytelling and the Book of Henry, where he spends like 10 minutes of a 40-minute video just giving a play-by-play of the plot. MauLer's video also has this. It's just, it lasts 4 hours. And I'd like to say, for anyone curious as to what he has to say, you can skip like halfway into part 3 of the analysis, and you'll miss nothing. Like, he's spending that entire first 4 hours just giving a excruciatingly slow play-by-play of the movie. But here's the thing. MauLer makes objective critiques. And what this means is that every qualitative judgment that he makes on the film is based off of what is provable. Which might seem fine, but what this results in is it just... The entire critique is just a endless string of observations that, like, you can just see. It's basically just watching the movie again, but slower and with a guy yammering in your ear about how much he hates it.
Maz is displayed to them on some kind of 360 video call, which isn't explained in any way, but why bother at this point? Also, C-3PO no longer has a red arm. There is no reason for this.
The act of watching all 3 of these parts all the way through is a uniquely unpleasant experience. He speaks so much and yet says so little, and like the tragic thing is that he does have points in amongst all of the observations. Like, he does have actual grievances with the film. It's just, like, it's so padded out that it becomes meaningless. What you doing? So, basically what's happened here is that MauLer doesn't know how to edit his shit, and now he thinks he invented autopsies.
Yep, this is the pattern that underlies all of MauLer's content, an illusion of deep analysis until you really give it any critical thought. On every occasion, 3/4 of the video are taken up by a bloated Wikipedia summary, interrupted very occasionally with a shallow observation about something MauLer does or does not like.
This fucking annoying Droid Lives Matter piece of shit is apparently in all of the episodes that feature the fucking Falcon. I didn't even think you could ruin a ship, but you found a way, Disney. You fucking found a way.
Rarely with any real thrust to his argument, rarely elaborated on as he sacrifices depth for breadth, and as you hurtle towards the conclusion after a 2 to 5 hour long rant, you know little more about the film than what happens in it, with a few errors, and whether some guy on the internet personally enjoyed it. MauLer and his fans, of course, objecting to this assessment as they believe he digs into something more.
It might be a problem for someone else, right? But it's a problem in their subjective lens. It doesn't make it objective. That
not talking about people.
On that,
it
right?
is a problem factually.
Some defenders of MauLer's style of analysis assert that MauLer uses multiple lenses of critical analysis to see the work from as many sides as possible, and that's what justifies this format. Nope. You could maybe argue MauLer briefly touches on the feminist aspect of a work, mostly just to accuse female characters of being Mary Sue's, but for much else, psychoanalysis, post-colonialism, queer theory, Marxism. Marvel at MauLer spending 3 minutes of his Last Jedi analysis saying, I don't like to get political, but film thinks war profiteering bad and child slavery bad, and that is bad because Disney makes money. As it goes, MauLer is almost scared to bring up any wider context from which to view a film.
He gets rather flustered when she implies that the artifacts were discovered and corrects her. These things were not paid for by this woman's ancestors. They were stolen just like they stole everything else.
The only lens MauLer really cares to explore is his own, what he calls the objective analysis, or the robot. It's kind of like structuralism, except MauLer just takes it on assumption that whatever he observes as bad is factually and objectively bad, with no deeper consideration.
We don't care about how we feel about these things, we're talking about what they are and what they do.
And if not, that the viewer can immediately distinguish between his opinions and his objective analysis. But why am I chattering on when there's cases to study? Let's have a look at Infinity War.
Reality is often disappointing.
I mean, it's Infinity War. All his fans had probably already seen it. And no, those last 6 minutes really don't go anywhere. MauLer says the sad bits made him sad, the funny bits made him lol, and concludes that the film is objectively good because it's good at elaborating on stuff from previous Marvel films. That's a mark of objective quality, by the way. Sucks if you wanted to enjoy it as its own movie. Now, as I said before, it's not the length of MauLer's content in and of itself that's the problem. In fact, maybe it isn't a problem if MauLer just wants to use this format, it's up to him. It might be incredibly tedious for me, but certainly many people may like it. It's not mine to write off as an artistic choice. As the format from which to hang the argument for your case, the interesting part of arguing about art, not so much, at least not the way this time is utilized.
Means get lost, Squidward.
That's just fantastic.
Dude, you're embarrassing me in front of the wizards.
That's just a fantastic comedic line.
He's from space. He came here to steal a necklace from a wizard.
Brilliant.
Infinity War is admittedly a kind of unfair example. MauLer really does phone this one in. It's just running through the film scene by scene and saying the bits he liked. I guess maybe he thought the more of his video was taken up by summary, the more objective the critique was? I mean, watch if you want a perfect example of why his notion of objective critique is so flawed in the first place, as he largely skips over what he has elsewhere acknowledged as clear and fundamental holes in the filmmaking. Something like that would almost give the impression that MauLer was denoting some things as important and some as not important, based on his own biases, and so his critique is unstructured in two different ways. Well, let's see if Black Panther clears things up.
There are several highly advanced pieces of technology and architecture everywhere, but actually they have thatch-style huts embedded into the structures. What is with the location and everyone's outfits and the weird war paint stuff? I mean, guys, seriously, why the fuck do you use spears? By taking the flower power back and burying yourself in large amounts of sand, you are able to speak to your father through dreamland, I guess. How exactly did Tony and his father not find out about the properties of vibranium? People getting stabbed and slit to shit, but absolutely no blood? Can't even go with the red lines on the bodies? Come on, guys. This film doesn't even explain why he's called the Black Panther.
You know CinemaSins? Yeah, this is all just CinemaSins. This is someone just running through a movie point by point, occasionally calling out things they consider bad plot holes, without really commenting on how it fits within the narrative, or making an argument for why these things actually matter to the text. Matter to them, or should matter to you. Just as Infinity War was a point-by-point summary, occasionally pointing out good plot things. Across his video, MauLer makes constant references to things like it being counterintuitive that only one person in Wakanda gets access to a special plant that makes you superhuman, usually the king. Or how, even though Wakanda is technologically advanced, they fall back to fairly archaic things like rustic-looking market towns and having strict traditions, or people using spears.
Why does the most technologically advanced society use fucking spears?
Sincerely, why does anyone use anything? If the dwarves are off making custom weapons for the Asgardians, why on earth would they make MauLer a small hammer and not a minigun or something? And why doesn't every Asgardian get their own special MauLer gun to help protect Asgard with? Plot hole. How come the US military has had the research notes on Cap super serum for so many decades, yet Most soldiers are just regular dudes and not thousands of Captain Americas. Oh wait, they actually address that in the fiction? Kinda like how they address why only one person gets the Black Panther's ability in the fiction of Black Panther. You might not like the explanation, but beyond telling us this is a thing that exists, you haven't given an argument for why it really matters here. For everything you simply call out in Black Panther, and then from your intonation we assume as flaws,
Not girlfriend kills a guy with a shoe.
I could look back to your Infinity War video and find similar, if not almost the exact same quote-unquote problems. Why are there literally 2 people from Doctor Strange's sect protecting the Time Stone, the single most important thing to these people? Look at how much Wong contributes to the fight. Are we seriously ignoring that they could portal in like a dozen more of these guys and likely stomp the 2 people Thanos sends down to grab it? Just the 2, eh? So even though Thanos has been roving around the galaxy for decades picking up recruits, he only had like 5 people on hand for Infinity War? And wait a second, if Thanos already knows he's planning on using the stones to snap away half of all life, why does he rove around for so long halving populations right up to the start of the film? Isn't he at that point just cutting all life by... hang on a second. 3/4.
I made a video on Infinity War, and people commented saying that, previously they thought it was okay, but after seeing this, they were like, wow, it's actually blah, blah, blah. I was trying to be as objective as possible in explaining how the characters move from X to Y to Z, and why that film is of quality. And the robots analysis of Infinity War, for example, would probably be that it's like a 6 or a 5 out of 10.
I think this film was intended for traditional reviewers, and they will be throwing out logic as much as possible, since traditional reviewers are the only people who appreciate a lack of logic.
Uh-oh. I don't personally care about these things, because I accept, for instance, that the first fight in New York would feel completely different if both sides had hundreds of unnamed fighters causing chaos all around the city, and, with the context of the film's escalation of tension, potentially throw things off. See, that's my argument for why I like that early on the fights in Infinity War are only between a few people, because it makes the massive Wakanda fight feel more as if it's been led up to, rather than just another exhausting massive clash. MauLer jabbing at Black Panther because it's too dark to see him well in the opening fight scene is ultimately meaningless, because he doesn't argue why this is a problem for the film. In Alien, the xenomorph is in darkness most of the film, yet you'd probably huff if you heard me blithely criticize the film because I couldn't see it most of the time. Because you understand it matches with the film's desire to create tension and a sense of the unknown. Black Panther, with the fact that it switches much of the perspective to the guards who are scared of him, also appears to be riding on this idea. It also, again, plays into the notion of escalating tension, as we're building the audience's excitement at later seeing him show off his full capabilities in a daylight setting. You can counter this by saying we already saw him fight in Civil War. I can counter by asking to what extent filmmakers are beholden to the assumption audiences saw the previous work in a series, and look, it's a whole conversation about how we each interpret and judge art. You can't see him in the dark at the start? I got nothing. It's the same kind of vague, contextless criticism as pointing out Wakanda is an advanced society with old-fashioned design. Elements which are true not only of many first world nations today, but almost all sci-fi settings.
What society based on the progress of technology and medicine, and protection in general, would allow the strongest person to rule rather than the smartest, or generally speaking, the best suited?
Maybe Wakandans don't look at intelligence the same way we do, because IQ is a pretty contentious topic even in societies it's established in, and being smart doesn't objectively make you a better leader. Maybe Wakanda, separate from its technological development, is an extremely patriotic nation that heavily discourages anything to suggest a change from the established traditions of the state. If only there was something in the text to establish this. See, look, I can point to elements MauLer has dinged past as objective flaws and, through interpretation, actually suggest ways it contributes to the film's storytelling. How it immediately establishes Wakanda's strict traditionalism as a contrast to its technological progress. My point here is pretty shallow, but I'm at least actually making one as opposed to rolling through an entire film. Even the parts where I don't actually have anything to comment on, stopping for a few seconds occasionally to eye roll at something so that the viewers can just intuit it's a bad thing.
He fucking farms rhinos. Why in the goddamn hell is he farming rhinos?
In a shocking twist, we get the exact same criticism brought up again regarding why Wakanda only wants there to be one Black Panther. And it's just... Man, how are you showing clips of Iron Man and Captain America while making this criticism and not seeing a contradiction? Why don't the Tibetan monks teach everyone the mystic arts? Why doesn't Spider-Man tell Oscorp or whatever about the spider thing so there can be more Spider-Men to protect the Earth? Maybe there's a fear there that if they don't consolidate this strength and use it sparingly, the Wakandans risk a lot more powerful people with bad intentions and no easy mechanism to stop them. You know how Iron Man has to specifically pick Peter out to give any kind of supersuit, and even then it's with heavy restrictions and only allowed to be used in a very specific context? Maybe it could be a similar kind of... oh, whatever.
My god, we're not even a quarter of the way through the film yet.
Now, does MauLer stumble upon some points I found strong in this 45-minute rant? Absolutely. I also found the writing in that first scene between the dad and the uncle contrived. This is followed up by a lengthy diatribe about how Shuri being a prodigal genius inventor type is apparently a problem for her and not the other prodigal genius inventors because... No, don't worry mate, I won't go there. Do you see what's happening here? In MauLer's own words...
Just another bloody stupid detail.
As we reach the 30-minute mark, MauLer is still just summarizing the film, making occasional digs that maybe half the time aren't easily shrugged off, and it begins to feel a whole lot like this is just a guy dinging things off the top of his head with no real thrust beyond the fact that the film made choices that made him feel bad. Without this elaboration, it's hard to really get why these contrivances matter here but not in Infinity War. No real delineation between what's a criticism of the film or the characters, what MauLer thinks of as objective flaws versus just things he personally didn't like.
T'Challa just agrees to it. Like, the way they frame this scene is that he has the opportunity to deny this shit, and yet he gambles himself, a powerless, suitless, techless Wakandan warrior, against a professionally trained CIA kill-count record-breaking psychopath with a vengeance obsession directed at your bloodline. What a dumbass move. You're about to hand your whole land and people to this monster because he has the correct rights to challenge you?
Now the fact is, MauLer doesn't seem to understand tradition as being a very overt theme in this pretty easy to understand Disney superhero film. Or it's just irrelevant to him because he doesn't frame his criticisms around notions of theme, what the film may be trying to communicate, how an objective aspect of the film, such as the fact that T'Challa lets Killmonger fight even if it might mean him gaining the throne, does not an objective flaw make simply because you personally wouldn't make that choice. Just as with the Infinity War video, MauLer exposes how his video's bloated length is a consequence only of the fact that he constantly repeats himself, discusses things that have nothing to do with his analysis of the work, thoughtlessly calls out as criticisms parts of said work which are perfectly in line with the narrative and logic of that world, or straight up makes up plot holes. And not because it's offering him the chance of a deeper analysis. Once again, we get a shallow reading in which a man on the internet angrily explains things in a film that may or not be bad, may or may not come with an argument as to why they're bad, but certainly if you listen to the tone of his voice, we know how he feels.
What the fuck? What the fuck, you dumbass movie?
It's just... oh, here's a long, boring summary of what happens in movie, and I pick out things in this that make it bad. It's really important they ride rhinos in Wakanda. Movie loses points for that. In this movie, doesn't matter if the villain's motivations are entirely inconsistent. Thing good, thing bad.
I really like people who are definitive and they have strong evidence. That shit's gold. It's like, yes, you put in the work. Instead of just going, well, if you look at this over here from this angle in this way, and then look at this part in the film as well, then it's pretty good, right? It's like,
We can insult MauLer's content all we like, but I don't really see that much value in just dunking on someone. Like, there has to be at least a bit of insight. So with that in mind, I'd like to bring your attention to a certain timestamp. It's 52 minutes and 20 seconds into part 3 of MauLer's critique of The Last Jedi. I mention this part because that's when he's done explaining the entire film in excruciating detail. But you might be wondering, how does he continue talking for an hour after that when he's done explaining the movie? Well, as it turns out, like, that's the good part. Like, the first 4 hours was just a massive lumbering preamble. This portion, starting at 52 minutes and 20 seconds into part 3 of MauLer's The Last Jedi critique, is truly a masterwork. It's such a condensed sequence of spicy takes that it makes the first bit seem like it's just a filtering method. Like, he's weeding out all the casuals. Now that I've told you that, you can just skip the useless garbage and get to the stuff that matters. And I recommend you do, because it provides a lot of insight into how MauLer views his craft. But also, we don't have all day, so I'll give you the short version. If there's one thing that can be taken away from this, it's that MauLer sees airtight storytelling as the absolute most important thing to strive for when you're making a movie. If, say, you ever had to make a choice between logical consistency or bolstering some other aspect of the work, you always choose logical consistency. For an example of this, if you, say, defended The Last Jedi by saying that it has a strong theme of failure and progression, then MauLer would be saying you're making an argumentative misfire, because, in his words, the themes go against the logical consistency. Like some logical consistency had to be sacrificed in order to include it.
What do I say to this? Well, most, if not all, plot lines and character developments we just went over for the last 4 hours don't make sense. They weren't supported by the previous films, nor were they well executed. They simply happened. The best example being Poe's. He didn't fail throughout the movie when you actually consider his actions. Finn only failed because the writer decided that a BB unit saw his team.
Nazi!
Things like this forced me to come to the conclusion that yes, Rian Johnson wanted this theme, and he shoehorned events to make it happen, but this makes the writing even worse. He put a theme over the characters, over the plot, to force the characters around the theme, to make you think about it on your own personal level, to ignore how inconsistent the writing is, to appear more intellectual.
Although, he seems to think that a theme is just noticing that a thing happens a lot, which is an odd way of looking at it. Like there's a part in the video where he just completely shoots down the entire idea of interpreting themes by picking a word from a hat. For his example, it was resurrection, and then pointing out all the times that someone or something resurrects during the film. Like, aha, this is equally arbitrary, therefore themes are bullshit.
Kylo allows the dark side in him to falter and resurrect part of the light. Poe resurrects the part of him that wants to maintain the cause rather than trying to be a hero. Leia is resurrected by the Force.
I don't know. I like the whole failure thing wasn't just people pointing out that characters fail. Like I thought a pretty big part of it was that Kylo Ren doesn't learn from his mistakes, like the mistakes that he made in The Force Awakens, and just continues to fail while everyone else just moves on. I don't know. It's worth talking about, though. Anyways, the same argument is used to discredit people who say that the visual splendor of The Last Jedi is a selling point. The term style over substance is used.
Next up would be the phrase, style over substance. This is of course in reference to the idea that you put your eye candy before your writing. Films like Speed Racer, Enter the Void, Transformers, 300, and Avatar are also used as examples in this sort of genre, if you can call it that. Some of those examples are far worse than others, but you get the point. The Last Jedi has a strong pattern of style over substance. Let's go through a few so you know what I'm talking about. Phasma disappears and then reappears in smoke, making no sense, but it looks imposing. The hyperspace jump makes no sense in universe, but it looks incredible. The destruction of the bridge on the Radis makes no sense, but it looks impactful. The bomber ships make no sense, but they reference World War II bombers, which looks striking. Phasma falling into a sudden pit of fiery death makes no sense, but it looks intense.
And furthermore, he claims that, and along with all this, he claims that stuff like visual splendor doesn't even matter because it's just gonna age, and it takes money to generate.
Imagine what the end result of this film would have been without the money behind it to fund the actors, the set pieces, and the CGI. These things don't matter in the grand scheme, not even the assets poached from Star Wars as a franchise. They do not matter to the writing. The effects will age. The shots will age. Every choice will age. Writing and storytelling is timeless.
This is honestly just a bewildering way of looking at film. I know there's a lot of online media critics who really value logical consistency, perhaps a little too much, but I haven't seen anyone else say that it is, like, straight up the only thing that can ever make a film good, and everything else is just a distraction. You know, you can just read a book, right? Like, how can visuals be neutral in a visual medium? And it's an especially strange critique to level at Star Wars of all things, which, as far as I can tell, is a series that is mostly known for its imagery. That's why I liked them. Like, I saw them without any nostalgia goggles, and I thought they were great. Like, I had a really good time with the imagery. I thought it looked and felt really nice. It had an ambience to it, and it also had huge-ass emotional set pieces, and I loved it all. And that's also why I didn't really like The Force Awakens, because it felt a little cold in comparison. It felt very standard. It didn't have the ambiance. And in turn, that's why I liked The Last Jedi, because there are some shots in that movie that are gonna be remembered alongside Luke looking out into the double sunset in A New Hope. Like, there's just so much emotional content in some of the events that happen in that movie, some of the images that are shown on screen. And that might explain why I didn't mind so much that the bombers were designed impractically. But here's the skinny. MauLer has heard all of this. In a critique of The Last Jedi Part 3, MauLer implies that argument and arguments like it are an attempt to shield the film from criticism. Like, he makes up a hypothetical episode 9 where, like, everything is, like, completely off the wall. Like, all the threads are dropped. It's hilarious, honestly.
Alright, it's time once and for all to destroy this argument. What if the 9th episode of the series opens with Luke saying, "The Sith must end too. I totally forgot. Sorry, lol. I'm sleepy, I guess." And he jumps, wearing only a nappy, into space. He chops every last Death Star, Star Destroyer, etc. in half and kicks the supremacy into a local sun. He then stands on the sun and says, "Kylo, you must return to the Jedi because they are actually okay and really cool." And so Kylo does. Would that be something you consider bad? Because if you did, if you said to me that this is terrible writing, do you know what I'd say back to you? You don't search for logic in a Star Wars movie. A movie full of laser weapons, noisy explosions in space, and little Muppets running around. You need to remember that this is a movie first with visual metaphor and not a documentary about real things happening in space.
And really, this just speaks to MauLer's utter narrow-mindedness when it comes to art. Like, the only way a film can be good or bad is based on how airtight the script is, and if you imply that there are other ways to judge a film, then he says you just don't have standards at all. Hi, MauLer, and probably Wolf and Rags too. If you're watching this, then I have a couple of film recommendations that I'd like to give you, because, while I'd like to have a discussion about these things, I do not want to do it exclusively in reference to The Last Jedi. I hope you understand. First on the docket is a film called Funny Games. Be sure to get the American version. Like, usually remakes are worse, but this is a director remaking his own work and actually improving on it in a lot of ways. Second is a film called Sorry to Bother You. It came out last year now. And the last film I'd like you to check out is called Under the Skin. Yes, I am in fact giving you homework. But if you want to, you can give us some film recommendations too, if you like. There's any 3 movies that you think are underrated that we haven't seen that would help your points. If I come onto EFAP and it turns out you haven't seen any of these, I'm just gonna step right the fuck back out. Sorry. I'm also going to step out if Rags is there.
Oh shit. MauLer's most recent review of 2018's Predator reboot is incidentally marked with all the same issues we've seen in the Last Jedi review, the Black Panther review, and every other extended critique. A tedious summary wavering between superficial digs at things you don't like because it makes you sigh and say what the fuck, and literally just saying things that happen with no real reason to remark on it.
And I'm not fucking kidding here, guys. She ends up shooting herself with the tranquilizer in her own fucking foot.
God, really? A strong female character making mistakes? Can't have that in today's Hollywood. With all that said, I think I'm getting it now. Writing this with Eric, combing through the archives, I get why MauLer and those who follow him have convinced themselves that this is the same as a real, in-depth, nitty-gritty critique. You have an area unexamined in your mind, and that's where the combination of conscious and unconscious impulses that make you feel certain ways about certain things lie. You've built a system, a concrete, coherent system that has made it easier for you to identify what things specifically you don't like. Mostly. Somewhere along the way, you convinced yourself that these things being objectively a part of the text, arguably, makes your feelings on them also objective. And now you've decided, without a lick of real study into how most of this stuff could or should be measured, that you're simply on another level to other critics. You've seen the code. Now you can spread the word by giving really long summaries of things and going, this good, this bad, this good, this bad. Hell, if you do it enough, it's just like a real analysis. It's like YouTube media critics self-help guidance.
Many have shared that they want a safe version of my video for their children to understand and learn from, which I am more than happy to provide in this instance.
Me, Wolf, and Rags, and many other people have what you could call a talent, a gift, whatever, to be able to discern media down to its composing parts. Well, where someone sees a scene, we might see a script instead. We're like, oh, look at the components moving.
And along the way, you've forgotten that perspectives are perspectives, even if they're based on the same objective thing. It's the kind of mindset that leads you to ignoring that some people might just think visuals are an important part of a Star Wars movie, and that's no less credible than you not liking it when Luke drinks the milk.
Why?
The kind of mindset that leads you to blindly say, that's objectively a 5 or a 6, without really thinking about what that even means. I'm not here as someone who's never done any of the things I think MauLer's doing. In fact, my two most popular videos on Sky High and Alice in Wonderland are both super rambly with way too much summary fluff and little distinction between a personal nitpick and a legitimate argument. But these are issues I want to recognise and grow from, and seeing your most recent review fall into the exact same holes, I felt a need to point out these methodological problems to you and the fans, many of whom still confuse your CinemaSins format for deeper critique. There is something deeper here, something not truly explored, and it ties together all these things talked about so far. But hey, maybe it'll all become clear very, very soon.
So MauLer is frequently accused of believing his opinions are objective, and this isn't actually quite true. He actually released a video recently that puts a lot of it to rest. So the problem is that his real opinions are equally bullshit.
And the word opinion is thrown around far more than references to the topic being discussed. The purpose behind it in this case is to champion the idea that there is no such thing as good or bad content, that everyone is simply sharing their perspective. You know, the mentality that everyone gets a medal no matter what. Participation is now enough to celebrate quality. Everybody who was in the race now gets a first place medal.
See, MauLer simply creates a distinction between two types of statements that you can make about a piece of art. There's a subjective and objective. A subjective statement would be that you thought it looked really cool, it had nice themes, it made you feel feelings, etc. While an objective statement is provable. It is based off the stuff that you're looking at, indisputable facts. It had dozens of plot holes. The character writing was inconsistent, all that jazz. The problem here is that supporting your assessments of quality with examples from the work itself doesn't actually make it objective, it just makes it well-founded. Let's say that you point out that this knife disappears mid-swipe, Where did it go? And you're right. You're absolutely right. That knife it's gone. It was there and now it's gone. Well done. You're very observant. But if we were using the word correctly, the objective statement would be that the knife is missing. You haven't actually said whether the film is good or bad or well made or poorly made until you can say why this knife trick made the film worse, which is subjective. This conflation leads to MauLer routinely implying that if you disagree with his qualitative assessment of a film, then you are denying the facts that he used to come to his conclusions, which could not be further from the truth. In fact, two people can completely agree on what's in a film and what's shown and disagree on its quality. In short, your standards for objective assessment are not separate from your subjective opinions. They're just more opinions. So, no, MauLer doesn't think his opinions are objective. He just thinks his opinions are objective. Bye, MauLer. Hope you have a good day.
What the fuck?
This new Force Awakens video, as it goes, has all the qualities we have spoken about here and more. Despite the fact that the man has now spoken for an accumulated 30 plus hours about how much he dislikes the new Star Wars films, if you account for his podcast, we are presented with a 3-hour-long critique, which... I mean, the first hour is just MauLer talking about Twitter arguments he had.
I simply don't agree with your approach to video game criticism. It's a little immature to write as if you've achieved objectivity and I'm out to make you look crazy for it. And I'd recommend, chilling out.
Seeing it come out just 2 days after Racervic's Mass Effect Andromeda overview, a full rundown of the game's development cycle, as well as provide key insights into aspects of the game which may have contributed to it being so unpalatable to many players, and why, in just under an hour, it's certainly an unfortunate contrast. When you get an hour and a half into this critique and almost nothing has actually been said about Star Wars The Force Awakens, you know there might be a problem. Don't worry though, this is only the intro, so it doesn't matter that we spend a whopping hour with MauLer just kind of ranting about disagreements he had about people thinking he's too pushy with his personal opinions on movies.
Regardless of how they feel, regardless of how Mark feels, regardless of how the world feels, I feel like it was a terrible decision from a man who had a fan story to tell, and no one could convince him of anything different because he had the final word on the script.
I'm incidentally going to ignore the argument that I can't make these points because it's only part 1 of a series. MauLer himself argues that doing so is like sending back the whole meal because you don't like the potatoes. And this is apt only in that looking at the way the cook serves up one portion is a good indicator of how they'll serve the rest. Will I turn away the whole meal? Probably not. I like to give things chances. That's why aside from finishing the Dark Souls 2 critique, I've made my way through most of what MauLer has made, only skipping breakdowns here where I feel like I'd just be repeating myself.
And so the guy says, well, your name shall be Han Solo. You heard it right, folks. Han's name comes from some random officer deciding it sounded neat. We didn't even need an origin scene for his fucking name. Also, I find it amusing that you're an origin film, but you couldn't be fucked to explain how Han Solo can speak Wookiee in the first place.
Having done so, I'm remarkably unsurprised that MauLer still doesn't get why some people disagree with his methodology in particular, trying to spot contradictions in other people speaking authoritatively about the objective quality of media, because as Eric points out, MauLer confuses a well-founded argument for an objective one. When his critics put out videos saying subjectivity is implied, they're, saying that the subjectivity of their views are implied. They still make room for disagreements, where MauLer will dedicate hours every week to mocking those who disagree with him and front-loading his Frankenstein monster of a critique overview, picking fights with people. But don't worry, this is only part 1 of this 6-part, 15-hour film review.
What are stories but mystery boxes?
Right, yeah, we're gonna tackle that, but not for about 12 hours.
And again, none of this gives any greater depth to MauLer's arguments. He'll go on a tangent about the Terminator films as an example of how lore contradictions can lead to a franchise falling apart, ignoring the fact that the apparently contradictory Terminator 2 is what most people preferred anyway. Ignoring the fact that the later entries had myriad aspects people disliked, which had nothing to do with breaking canon. It's all just in the mix, and each individual point is lost in this murk of objective critique.
Why do stormtroopers have laser versions of medieval weaponry available?
I don't know how MauLer will take this video, whether it might spark introspection as to whether he feels he's most effectively putting his points across with this increasingly bloated format, or if he'll double down, insist I'm trying to police him by offering my own perspective. MauLer has not had a great history with those he disagrees with, even going back to his early work picking fights with Mark Brown for criticising Dead Space. He's called opposing critics massive faggots, then taken back his apology when it doesn't come with full forgiveness. Even Eric has had a full hour of a livestream dedicated to mocking his physical appearance and calling him an autistic retard for disagreeing with one of his friends, so who knows. More than likely he'll shrug this off because I didn't provide the full context of his work as he did with Eric's last, desperately trying to ignore that the first hour of his new video is a highlight reel of the exact tactics he calls disingenuous in others, up to and including attacking people's content without playing one piece of audio from said content. Maybe I'm wrong. I guess my aim is more on those who might be led to look at the popularity of MauLer's content and say, huh, well, I guess that means I don't even need to consider how I'm discussing a work. I can just vomit out my 20-hour-long Space Jam review and then be shocked to discover people often miss large swathes of what I'm saying when I'm told I'm contradicting myself, when critics misunderstand what I'm getting at. I implore you to reconsider. This isn't a demand, you can do as you wish, but few people engage with material in this way, and it isn't just because they haven't thought about it. I don't serve you pizza the size of a dinner table and then insult you for not appreciating the 19th slice, and I don't throw out the benefits of clarity and concision in making a point. Does every video need to be 10 minutes long? Absolutely not, and that's why I front-loaded this video with creators who do produce insightful long content that I highly recommend checking out. Honestly, it's up to you, and maybe you'll be the first person to do a day-long review of a fantasy family film without sacrificing the depth or clarity of your arguments. I don't believe MauLer and those who emulate him do. I think instead what we're seeing is a group of people that just generally agree about movies, have the same nitpicks, and through enough circle jerking, have essentially decided that they are in a special club where only they know what makes things objectively good or bad, who can ignore the fundamental flimsy subjectivity of their argumentation because, well, they agree with each other, and that gives them the right to push their evaluation of a work as a notch above the rest, to in fact seek out those who disagree with that, to act like basic middle school bullies because they've decided they're right. The length of the critique doesn't wind up deepening any understanding of the text, only to obfuscate the lack thereof. But hey, that's just my opinion, and you're free to agree or disagree in the comments below.